Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining the Coach's Corner with Fitter and Faster, and your host here, Mike Murray. We are very excited today to introduce two of the best club coaches in the United States from two of the best club teams in the United States. The first coach that I'd like to introduce today is Coach Chris Plumb, and we are thrilled to introduce Coach Chris. Chris is from the Carmel Swim Club in Indiana. As the head coach and CEO, Chris oversees all aspects of the club, and he coaches primarily the high-performance training group. Chris's execution of his vision for Carmel Swim Club has pushed the teams towards recognition as a USA Swimming Gold Medal Club of Excellence 5 times since 2011. Chris has also served in many capacities as a national team coaching staff member on both the U.S. national and junior national team staffs. And Chris, you are also a proud Niagara LSC alum. So a quick shout out to all our Niagara LSC alumni on the call. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mike. Happy to be here today and sharing a little knowledge.
Awesome. And Chris, we also have one of your former coaches from Carmel with us today. I feel like we're bringing the band back together. It's my pleasure to introduce Coach Ian Murray. And Ian, you probably don't get asked this very much, but I do occasionally. So I'm going to put it out there for everybody. We are not actually related. However, is your Murray a Scottish Murray or an Irish Murray?
It is a Scottish Murray.
Oh, that is unacceptable. But we are very happy to have you here. Chris, or I'm sorry, Ian, you've served as a head coach of Dynamo Swim Club since 2017, and you've been named to several USA Swimming national team staff positions, as well as leading the 2019 USA Swimming Junior National Team as the head coach. One thing we have in common is we both worked at Stanford Swim Camp as young coaches. That was a pretty awesome experience. I'm sure you can relate. Living in Palo Alto as a 20-something for a summer is a lot of fun. Ian, you and Chris share a long history of working together as you were the associate head coach alongside Chris at Carmel Swim Club, and we are thrilled to have you. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Appreciate it.
Awesome. I'm going to dive right into it, guys, because one of the things that all of us as club coaches in the U.S. are working on right now is how are we navigating these uncertain times, right? So for all of us, this is such a new dynamic to operate inside of, and it's such a challenge, I think, for a lot of teams out there who maybe don't enjoy the size that we are able to work with. So I want to start with just asking each of you, how are you dealing with communicating with your club during these times? You know, Ian, one of the things that's really helped us at Victor Swim Club is Dynamo has put together a really great reopen plan. And I know that for you guys in Georgia, that's starting pretty soon. But I want to ask you both how you're connecting with your athletes, your families, your membership, and how has your coaching and your coaching staff changed in terms of communicating with your team during this health crisis? So I'm gonna put that over to you first, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to really focus on engagement and our family and athletes' well-being first. Obviously, the workout piece and physical fitness and those things are extremely important as well. But when it comes to Zoom meetings or whatever platform that our coaches are using with our athletes, the most important thing has been connection. It's a high level of participation in each meeting, making sure athletes are doing well, obviously physically, but also mentally and emotionally, and providing whatever resources we can during those meetings to ensure that they stay in a good place. We've also been engaging our entire club through some regular webinars that reach everyone. We've obviously had some high-level athletes come on between, Ryan Murphy, Elizabeth Beisel, and others who have been really good, and we've had some really good turnouts for that. But also, this took us as an opportunity to educate the families. So, like, I've done a presentation on college. My head injury coach, Nick Graves, did one on long-term development. We did one on volunteering last night. So just really trying to provide as much content and educational experience as we could for our membership that feel like, we're still here for you. And thankfully our response has been really positive. Like our membership is really grateful for all we're doing. But I also think our staff has really evolved from it too, including myself. Discovering the whole webinar thing, I'm like, why haven't I been doing this before? Because if I had to give a college talk, I was having to do it at 3 different sites. And now, I can just do it from the comfort of my own home and probably actually have a much better experience for most people. And we have some coaches that adapted really, really quickly to it and are thriving. And we had some people that had to make some big changes and adapt slowly because technology is not their thing. But ultimately, this is the hand you're dealt. You got to play it. And I'm proud of our coaches. They did a really good job with it.
Absolutely. I think you make some great points there about how, as coaches, we have rarely used this modality to communicate with our teams. We have rarely used this dynamic to engage our athletes and families. And moving forward, I'm also thinking about how we can use this platform to better serve our membership as a whole. The other thing is, at Victor Swim Club, we are really planning to run our dryland probably for the next 12 months via Zoom. I've found that the attitude and effort on our Zoom meetings has actually exceeded what we've done in person before. So for whatever factors are behind that, that's something that we have learned and we are adapting moving forward. Chris, in Indiana, what are some of the things that you guys are doing? I don't know what your state guidelines are right now. Ian is in a different situation than both of us, obviously. So what are some of the things that Carmel's doing right now throughout this crisis?
Yeah, I'll just echo a lot of what Ian said. Trying to do similar things with the Zoom meetings and connections, particularly with our high performance athletes. Spent some time trying to develop leaders, think about leadership and sending out different articles and having those conversations, a lot of journaling, having different discussions there. One unique thing we're doing, though, during this time, we always do our swim-a-thon, but obviously with not being in the pool, we couldn't do that. So right now we're having our fundraising campaign. We're doing 10 days of courage, perseverance, and giving. And we're having different physical challenges. Yesterday was our first day. And so we had our families get on Zoom and do a minute of squats. And we had everybody going and we timed it and we're posting those scores, or we'll post those scores either later tonight or tomorrow. So in that part of the dry land, the squats is part of our culture and just trying to keep that alive as much as we can. And so I thought that was a unique thing and we're going to continue doing that through next week. Just trying to raise awareness and letting people know we need your help and you're part of a community.
That's awesome. And so when you have these families, are they doing the exercises via Zoom? Are you witnessing it? So there's a little bit of checks and balances in there.
I'm not going to review the video. One of my coaches, he told me he did 83 squats. And I'm like, I don't know, in a minute, right? I'm going to have to check the video on that there, Jake. But, it's all in good fun, and people are recording their scores. The whole Birchall family did it. And it was just very cool to see, former Carmel athletes in helping their dad do it. So we had alumni on there too. So it was really cool to see that connection from far away.
Now, are you guys sharing some of these things across your social media platforms as a team? Chris, is that something that you guys do at Carmel? Do you share any of that stuff via Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah, if you go on any of our social media channels, you're going to see the courage, perseverance, and giving, and just posting the videos of things that we're doing. We did it twice yesterday. We did 8:30 and a 5:30. And so we had a group from the 8:30 do it and film themselves in their basement. And then we posted that video for everyone to see that, hey, people are doing this and, get your family to do it. And I know one of the young kids who said, I don't know if that dad's going to be okay in the back there. Just get a little bit of fun. And, and so, we're trying to do that connection as much as we can on social media.
Sure. Ian, how about you guys down at Dynamo?
Yeah, we tried to increase our social media presence as a whole just because, it's the easiest way to connect with the kids, particularly through Instagram. So we've been, a little bit of everything. There's been a lot of our groups have actually created Instagram pages just for their groups and their dry land. So there's a lot of sharing that's going on in our group. That's probably not out there as publicly as, the Dynamo main page of Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, but internally, like, it's being shared quite a bit. We try to keep the larger platforms. We're continue to put our message out there and just continue to keep our swimmers and families motivated.
Sure. One thing, Ian, that I don't know if I've told you this, but I don't know if it's because we were on national team coach's email, but I get all of the Dynamo updates from Mary Grum because my last name is Murray. So I see everything that's happening. So you might want to let Mary know. Get me off that Dynamo coaches list. Listen, I love seeing what Cecilia's up to. We're old friends. She's from New York. It's great to catch up on everything Dynamo, but you might want to send a note over.
It's really funny you mentioned that because she emailed me today about her son Ian and something, and I was looking at the emails that were on there, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, what's that guy doing on there? It's got nothing to do with this.
Yeah, just a heads up there. Guys, moving directly into our topic, we're thinking today about macro training. And when we talk about macro training, we're looking at the fundamental aspects of what our programs are built upon. So during the concept development of your teams, what are some of the guiding principles when you're thinking about the foundational cornerstones of training at Dynamo and Carmel? Are they simply physiologically rooted, or are there some philosophical tenets that mingle in collaboration? And I'm going to point to you first, Chris, because I know that during Ian's formative years as a coach, you were his mentor.
Well, that's a scary thought when you think about it, Ian. But
I'll hail the master.
Yeah, I guess it's, when I think about just planning a season in terms of the macro piece, I always begin with the end in mind, and I always try to ask myself, okay, what do I want my team to look like at whatever that last meet is? And it often starts to be, who knows with what's going on now, but you start in September or August and you look for what's going to look like in a year, and you kind of work backwards from there, building in pieces that you want to see. And I think also during that time, you need to reflect on what worked last year and what didn't work. And I often try to go, okay, what's the 85% I want to keep, and what's the 15% that I need to get rid of? Where were we weak? Where were we strong? How do we continue to do what's working and continue to do or get rid of the stuff that wasn't? And you got to have a hard look and hard conversation with yourself. And some of the best time, some of our best seasons have come after really bad seasons because that didn't work. And then, I think you look at the different components and you just build, you start from the beginning too. You want to build up your stroke technique and your aerobic fundamentals, and you want to trickle in pieces here and there. But I think it always just starts from, where do you want to end at? What do you want your team to look like? And I don't look at just physiologically. It's the whole athlete. What are they going to look like mentally? What does our team look like? How strong are we going to be? Are they going to be confident when they step up on the block? And am I going to give them the tools from a physiological standpoint to withstand the challenges that they face in their race? So, there's so many things that can go into it, but you just got to ask yourself, what do we want to look like at the end of the year?
Sure. And Chris, what type of historical background are you giving your athletes in terms of the culture at Carmel? Who has come before them? Is that a part of your program that you talk about at the beginning of the season when the team is thinking about where you want to be in March or April?
Yeah, I try not to dwell too much on the past or the past year. You certainly recognize. I think the good thing is now, when we first started at Carmel, we didn't have any junior national qualifiers when I was first head coach. And so you have to develop that, I would say, people can trust and know that what you're doing is going to work. And, now that you have that, we have that at Carmel, it's a little bit easier to convince people of the work that they're going to do because we've had success. So we can point to names and success. We can have those conversations, but you don't want to take away from, evaluating what you currently have on your team. And I think we talk about just standing on the shoulders of giants. So every year you get better because of the information that you've learned and that's been passed down. And I know we've had several athletes who I consider to be trendsetters or icebreakers, or just breaking the way through to that next level. And I've been fortunate to coach those athletes. And I know the trickle down effect from those athletes have made a deep and lasting impact on the program.
Absolutely. I think that's so important to keep an open mind, right? When you're developing that macro plan, what things are going into it? I have all of these different aspects that I want our athletes to glean, but what things do I want to put into it that they're going to be able to latch onto and understand, that they're going to be able to apply, and that I can count on a few leaders leading the way so that we don't have to do all the work?
Well, I always say our team will go as far as its leaders will go. I mean, I know that ultimately I am the leader, but really, I always go back to athlete leadership and having them drive the program, because it's their careers, it's their future, and we want to give them the tools to be successful. And we can draw upon past athletes too, and they can see what worked from different people. And I think that's been really successful for us.
Absolutely. And Ian, you were able to play a role in a lot of that success at Carmel alongside Chris. What are some of the things that you have taken from that experience that have helped you develop that macro plan at Dynamo and continue the long-standing tradition of success at Dynamo? That's a job where you're moving from Carmel at an extraordinarily high level. You're going to Dynamo, and the expectation for success is as high. So what are the things that you did immediately to develop some of those macro plans and kind of ensure not only to yourself and your staff, but those athletes, that they were going to be taken care of with a plan that was going to lead them towards success?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning of my tenure at Dynamo, was due to unfortunately tragic circumstances. But the positive piece of that is that I didn't really walk into a broken system. You're talking about a strong club, a strong culture. I'm surrounded by really good people who know their jobs. So, a lot of it was just absorbing what the Dynamo culture was, and then identifying what things we do really well, in my opinion, and how we're going to enhance those. And then obviously look for the things that were opportunities to improve upon, kind of like what Chris said with the 85-15. So I think protecting our culture and building on our culture is always like at the forefront of any plan that we're going to develop. And like Chris, yes, I'm like, from the year standpoint, plan with the end in mind, something that has been preached to us through Vern Gambetta and other influences that we've had. But I think we would both agree, we also even think about the quad as well. We're fortunate to coach at high-level programs, and we may have athletes that are going to be able to impact that one meet every 4 years. So I think that's always going to be a big piece of our planning process. I think I'm a relationship-based coach. So I think, caring for my athletes is not just a physiological piece they're planning for the year. It is their emotional standpoint, their mental standpoint, just shaping them to be really good human beings, because I think the culture piece and then the relationship piece is what drives the physiology. Because if the culture piece and the relationship piece is there, you get buy-in. And when the buy-in is there, like Chris says, people are going to show up and they're going to be willing to do the work. And then once you have the physiological piece, I mean, we plan long-term. We believe in long-term athletic development. We believe in all strokes. We believe in all distances, and we're going to prepare people for that. We don't specialize. We kick a lot. I think we focus on coaching the person and training the athlete. Those are the things that I'm primarily focused on when I'm planning for a year. And then once I have like those major things established, you can go through and start thinking about the physiological challenges that you're going to put on them, whether it's in the water, on land, or a combination of the both. Absolutely.
And some of the things that you mentioned there, Ian, I know that were influenced at Carmel in your time with Chris, and our mutual very good friend who I know is on right now, TJ Day. He always talks about core values and core principles when he and I are talking about what our clubs want to do and what the future of our teams look like. And something that he did very early on at Star that I was very appreciative of was that he outlined the team's core values, and then he put them up in banners that surrounded the pool. And I know that it was a very Carmel idea, but he also has really added on to that. So those core values that you both talk about in developing that macro training plan, I think are really, really important. The next thing that I want to ask you guys is, during that development of the macro training plan, how cognizant are you about the creative process? Now, anybody who knows anything about swimming knows that at Carmel and now at Dynamo, there are a lot of creative ideas that are happening. A lot of creative ideas that are going on with the use of some assisted swimming and using equipment to swim faster. And Chris, I'm going to start out with you. When you're putting together that plan and you're thinking about doing some new things, and you guys with the Gain Swimming Summit and what you've done with Vern, I know that there's a creative process that's happening at both Dynamo and Carmel. Chris, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think anytime you want to do creative stuff, you have to look at, we talked about the power towers or the Destro machines that we use at Carmel. I have to look at it and make sure that we can cycle these in or work these into a weekly plan with your program. We first started doing the buckets and pulleys. We had to answer a lot of questions first. How do we fit this in? Where does it go? I mean, I know Ian's smirking because he was the last person to come around and convincing to do this. He's like, "This is crazy. How are you going to make this work?" So, but having someone like him made me really think about how we were going to do that. And so we had to get creative. And I had these pulleys coming off the bottom of the pool because, they wouldn't let us hang stuff on the wall. We didn't know how to build it yet. And we didn't know if they worked. So we talked about that 85-15 and all right, let's give this a shot. We're going to have these things come off the pool. I mean, the kids who swam then still joke about going to the bottom of the pool and pulling these kettlebells up off the bottom, nearly drowning, trying to get it up on the pool deck. But that winter at Junior Nationals, we broke the 200 free relay national record, like out of nowhere. I didn't even know what the record was, and these girls just crushed this heat. And we're like, Ian and I just kind of looked at each other like, what just happened? So, I think getting creative, but we had to do it in a way that it made sense and that you could get a lot of people involved and you could evaluate to say, hey, this worked or this didn't. And we had to challenge each other because, Ian did not want to let go. And I think he made me better and I made him better. And we've eventually figured out a place to put this and cycle this through our program.
Sure. I remember joking with you guys and TJ at Ohio State Juniors a few years ago. We were just joking about training and things like that. And that was the day that Kibler won the 500 and then 35 minutes later won the 50 back-to-back. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think that those pulleys are a big reason why he was able to do both of those events and have the range that him and a lot of other, some of our better athletes do. I don't know if this is true, but I think he's the only 1800 male on the same day to go under 420 and under 20.
It was pretty awesome. It was a great way to start the first day of that meet. I'll always remember that. That was a pretty impressive performance. Ian, how have you taken some of that creative process that you learned at Carmel and then maybe customized it for what you're doing at Dynamo and made it your own?
Yeah, Chris said something interesting there. I was probably the one that was always hesitant. I'm still pretty structured, but there was a time where I was really structured, and it's like, no, we can't do that. It's got to be this way. And as much as I probably pulled him back and made him think about, how are we going to do this? How are we going to apply it? How's it going to impact most people? And he was probably pulling me in the other direction to think outside of my own box and I've got to consider new ways to reach and challenge athletes, on a daily basis. So yeah, we definitely use some things that are similar to what Chris does at Carmel. We don't probably have as many pulleys as he does, but it is an active part of what we do. You're definitely going to see it once a week for us. But I think just using equipment in general, my athletes use the parachute basically every workout, and sometimes that's for simply resistance or power, but mostly it's for technique and getting feel for the water. We use drag socks, we use wiffle balls, I don't think they have a really big bag of tools, but I think the tools that we use them a lot. We use them really well with, a lot of thought behind why we're using them. And I think that's where another influence on us as coaches from Vern Gambetta is give athletes movement problems to solve. And, we use the equipment to help them do that in the water. This is, the ideal technical circuit for me is showing a world-class example on a video, giving them some type of technical protocol to work on that example. And that might include equipment or pulleys or whatever. And then get some video of yourself doing it, make sure that you're making the changes and try to do it at some type of speed. So that's the biggest thing I brought with me. That's a big Friday afternoon thing for us throughout the school year, is that it's the one time where I get all 10 lanes in the competition pool. We can use the pulleys and get all this space, and we usually break all the toys out. And those are really engaged practices. It's a good way to finish the week when people are tired and they're fatigued, and it's a good way to set up also for an awesome Saturday morning.
That's really great. And I think we'll attribute this to Vern, but Ian, you said it, so you get credit for it right now. But if we can talk about this really impactful quote that you just mentioned, we're giving our athletes movement problems to solve. Chris, can you talk a little bit about what that means in your program?
Yeah, you talk about a tenet of your program. That's something I'm always thinking about. And Vern also talked about altering the playing field. And I think using the wiffle balls, drag socks, those things do that. Movement problems to solve to me is, especially in the swimming pool, is about efficiency. And we talk a lot about go this time in this stroke count, go this time taking one less stroke, go this time taking one less stroke each lap. I know one set we did a lot this year was 75s descend to within 5 seconds or under 5 seconds of your 100 time, but take one less stroke each lap that you do it. And just creating these problems to solve over and over again, you're going to get that repetition that you want with some speed and some constraints. I think we call it constraint-based learning is how else I would think about it. And the other thing, too, is in the weight room, thinking about how you're going to solve movement problems and moving around the weight room and putting hurdles up and jump over this, one leg that. Just getting you to think as an athlete. That's how Vern taught us to think. And I thought the great part, it's just so awesome to hear Ian talk, because he always brings up the information that I haven't thought about in a while that I know. So
likewise,
probably did the same for me. So it just takes me back to days in the office where we would just go back and forth. And, I think those movement problems to solve are just fantastic. And you just can't get enough of that. So
that's a great point. And to elaborate on that a little bit, one of the college coaches who I really appreciate and have grown to really love, Bobby Ganturo at NC State, whenever he's talking about what he's doing with sprinting, he's talking about working in the lab and experimenting. And I think that's how we become better. And I think you guys are doing a lot of that. So Ian, at Dynamo, how are you working to create some of those movement problems to solve?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. The one thing that's very different for me at Dynamo as opposed to Carmel is that the team at Carmel is, at normal times, a little over 500 athletes, but virtually everybody's homegrown. Carmel's a city of just under 100,000 people, and all those kids that are in that program, for the most part, and I'm talking 99% almost, go to Carmel Clay schools. So the kids that are walking through the doors, they're getting consistent, what their baseline is for physical education, they operate the same way. So, you kind of knew what you were dealing with. At Dynamo, I coached a group of 20 athletes and they go to 18 different high schools. So their backgrounds and what they look like when they walk through the door are very different. and then you spread that out over other 850 athletes over all the groups, like it's very different what people will look like as they come through the door. So I think for our youngest groups, like it's basically just about pure movement, teaching them to explore their bodies and how it functions on land. So our 10 groups is a lot about, it's fun. Like there's, a lot of dancing, obstacle courses and things like that. And we eventually add instruction on, strength movements and body awareness as they get older. And I would say that if you were to look at the Dynamo senior program, the Carmel senior program, that's where they're going to be probably pretty similar, but the pathway to that is very different. And in the water, the same thing. Like I think you're just working that swimming equation. It's really going to come down to, what was my time? How many strokes did it take me to do that? And how many heartbeats is it requiring me to make that happen? So playing with that equation quite a bit, it's really what leads to fast swimming, but also what keeps your athletes engaged. You give them problems to solve. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to give you more. They're going to give themselves more. I think that's just really where the magic happens.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. One thing that we could tack on to that question in terms of thinking of our macro training plans is something that's really important. And at some point in their development, whether it's early on in our clubs, we have to let these kids play a little bit. They have to play and explore and experiment in order to get better, especially within those constraints, Chris, that you talk about that we load on them. How are they playing inside of that? How are they experimenting with it? What's something that you guys have to do when an athlete from a different program transfers to your club and all of a sudden, instead of doing these high volume sets, they have to really focus in with different tools, techniques, maybe different drills that they're not used to. And in their mind, all of a sudden, they think they're not working hard. Chris, what do you do when you have an athlete like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's happened, and it takes some time. I think, the one thing you could point to is, hey, this has worked for others, but it doesn't, that would be an easy, quick fix. I mean, it really comes down to helping that athlete understand that if you want to get better, you're going to have to be better technically, and you're going to have to be better on the fundamentals, because I always look at those programs where if their technique isn't good, that's your limiting factor. I mean, we can always add more volume. That's not hard to do. What is hard to do is to do it well and to do it right. So, and I tell people when they come, you might slow down. You might go slower for a year, but in the long run, you're going to be better for it. And so it just takes time and convincing. And, you can't always measure a practice how hard it was by a heart rate. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. And we want you turning their brain on. And I think that's a hard part for people, because you come from a place where you're just going up and down the pool. You're used to actually turning your brain off.
Right.
So, and that's why we're using some of these tools and this thinking outside the box, just so there is awareness and you are working on those pieces.
Absolutely. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Chris said. The other thing that we look at is, in the metro Atlanta area, there's a lot of swimming, there's a lot of clubs. And, if you want athletes to be there, you better make sure you're doing a really good job, because people might have to drive by 3 different clubs just to walk in your door. So I think what I mean by that is, like, when you walk in, like it's a bit of a partnership, like this is who we are, this is what we're about, and this is what you can expect from us. And if you're on board with that and that's something that you're looking for, usually the onboarding process is going to be pretty smooth. And like Chris says, like there may be 1 step backwards, they go 2 steps forward over a 6-month or year-long period, and if they can accept that, it's usually a really good fit. But sometimes you get people that are looking for quick fixes too, and it's like, hey, like, you guys do such a great job, like, what are you going to do for me? And I'd rather think about, like, no, what are we going to do for each other? Because, like, you're a part of our team and you're going to contribute to that first, because within our team goals is how you're going to achieve your individual goals. But I think that's just, like Chris said, like, it's very similar, like, on the onboarding process individually, but like we take the team approach too. Like, if you're going to be on board with us, and you want to get the results that you're asking for, like you've got to be this type of player within the team, because if you're an individual, like you're going to struggle.
Absolutely. Inside of thinking of our macro training plans, and we have some coaches who are going to probably start to experiment more and more with destro pulley systems and different resistance training. And we have a great question here from Ken O'Reilly from Scarlet out in New Jersey. At what age or stage of development are you going to start to use pulleys? Would you say that they're most effective after a kid has developed a foundation for dryland strength? And is it too early to use pulleys for athletes who are 12 to 14? And I'll start with you, Ian, and then we'll move over to you, Chris.
I think it depends on what you're using them for. I think whether it's a pulley or a cord or a parachute or whatever type of resistance training you're trying to provide, what is your goal? What is the purpose of, what's the stimulus you're trying to achieve there? And I think I have no desire to put a 12-year-old on pulleys to see like how much weight they can move and really just think about speed and power. But, being on pulleys with a really light weight or using a parachute, it's instant feedback. When like I got an armful of water right there, like that was a good stroke. I felt that I need to try to do that again. Like I want to feel that again. I think the instant feedback piece with younger kids is appropriate. I don't think you should rely on it, but I think sprinkling it in and using it with, some younger kids is appropriate when the sole focus is technical. And then as you become more developed and become older, you can obviously start introducing it for technique plus the power and speed portion.
Sure. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. I think, you can use resistance, maybe even 11, 12 with a parachute or something very light. I can only tell you at Carmel, we reserve the right to use the pulleys for when they get to high school. I don't think there's any rush in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to be on there. And I often think about, too, you got to leave these kids places to go. And you want to make sure you can continue to challenge them year after year instead of giving them this stuff, whether it's 6, 7, 8. Learn how to swim right. And you can use the pulley later, but the parachute is a great feedback. And, we use that for this, drills and skills with the feedback piece. I think that's the one thing about swimming. If you get back in the water now, you don't always feel like, you get so used to it, and then you have to put something else on there for your awareness to increase. And I think that's where that parachute comes into play.
Absolutely. We have been experimenting more and more with these tools. And so what I'm finding is it becomes extraordinarily more challenging to write your workouts that are incorporating training tools than it does writing an aerobic set or putting together a test set, because you're getting so involved with the intricate details of what those sets are. So I know what you mean when I know what a lot of our people who are tuning in are asking a lot of questions about it. The development of those types of training sets takes a lot more time. Would you guys agree with that when you're putting together your workouts?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
A quick story I've told it a lot of times because it was very impactful for me as, coach. We were, I maybe like 6 months into working with Vern, and finally to a place where like you felt like you could, write a workout and know what the hell you were doing. And Vern came in for like a second or third visit that year and like watched the workout, watched the dryland, and the kids crushed it. Like they crushed it. They were awesome. And I just, asking for feedback. Vern, what'd you think? What'd you think? And he's like, well, that's great. Like, did you make them tired or did you make them better? And like, that's something that's always resonated with me. And yes, that was a dryland portion, but like, I think, I always think about that from, every workout. It's like, okay, yes, there's got to be a training stimulus. You want it to be hard. You want it to be challenging, but are they really getting better? What are they learning? Because I think you can accomplish both those things. It can be an appropriate level of volume. It can be an appropriate level of intensity, but how are they executing both the volume and the intensity? Because that's what it's really going to come down to. As Chris said, like, technique is your limiting factor. And if you're not able to execute properly over whatever volume and intensity you're being asked to do, like, you're going to get exposed at some point.
We are the purveyors on our pool deck of quality of movement, right? So it's our job to consistently evaluate the quality of that movement. And you mentioned that quote by Vern, and that's a quote that I have talked about with my staff before. So I think that's really, really important. Chris, when you're putting together those workouts, what are some of the things that you're considering when you're implementing all of your tools and your toys?
Oh, man, I think, I mean, you got to start with what are you trying to accomplish that day, and, like, begin with the end in mind. What are the end goals of this practice? And I think, Vern, he did a good job too of teaching us, okay, what are you going to do? What did you do the practice before? What are you going to do the practice after? Are these going to be related? And I've always looked at practices and making sure that we're balanced and not having these systems butt heads against each other. So, if one day you're going to be highly skilled and maybe some anaerobic work, your next day might be, contrast that with aerobic work, allowing that anaerobic system to rest, giving that aerobic system time to rest on your anaerobic day, and make sure you're not mixing those modalities too much. Otherwise, you're going to get this, conflated system. So I think when I talk about incorporating equipment, it's like, what am I trying to accomplish with the equipment? I'm not a huge guy that likes to make sure the deck is messy. I hate having every single piece of equipment. I've kicked a few mesh bags in my day because of that. But I do think I like to think about setting up the stroke and using the tools and equipment to set up the stroke on that day. So, if it's a backstroke day, what are the key things I want to work out? I want to keep their head still. So we're going to use a plastic donut and a wiffle ball. We're going to keep our head still. We're going to start there and work from the inside out. And just thinking about in ways of what am I trying to do? What are the tools I have available to me? How much time do I have? And then writing that practice, because every day is a work of art and you have to treat it as such. And I think I heard this quote too from Jack Nelson. And your job is just as important as a doctor. Like, you're impacting lives, you're changing lives, and you have to view your practice as a masterpiece and treat it as such. And if you value those 2.5 hours you have with your group, you're going to make an impact. If you just go, oh, we're going to swim up and down and doesn't really matter, then that's what people are going to treat it as. So you've got to value that time with your athletes and value how you're going to be resourceful in that time. And make your masterpiece that day, and then you move on to the next day. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I like to think about it.
No, I think it's absolutely right. And really thinking about the craft of how we put together our workouts. I certainly fell as a young assistant coach into that trap of, I'm going to make the hardest possible thing that I can make right now and give it to the kids. And that's what I thought for a little while as a young coach, even though I had some great coaches as an athlete. That's what I thought my job was, until I realized that all I was doing was making people tired all the time. And when you make people tired all the time, they get frustrated. And when you do the same thing all the time, they get bored. So we have to be craft masters when we're putting the workout together. And I love that example that you gave there from Jack Nelson. The next thing, and we've talked about this a little bit, but and I'm going to have Ian speak to this first, but what are some of the resources that you both use to help create that programmatic framework? So, obviously you rely on your own experience. You guys both play a huge role in the gain experience. But what are some resources that you use? And maybe you use each other at the beginning, those late days in August when we're all at clinics and we're talking. What are some resources that you use when you put it together, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts first with your time on deck, probably at nationals and juniors, and you're surrounded by your peers who you look up to and you trust and you value their opinions, and you just talk shop. What review what went well this past year, what needs to be changed, and bounce those ideas off other people. I think it leads to like what I've always said is the greatest strength of USA Swimming is our willingness to share information with one another. And kudos to everybody, especially in times like these, because I think we're doing it more than ever right now. Like the amount of sharing that's going on a daily basis, the amount of like coaches Zooms and emails that are being kicked around with all kinds of information. It's just making everyone better. So I think for me, like after those conversations, I start then going to the people that I trust, who may or may not have been on that pool deck, and then talk to them. I asked for feedback probably from my staff. I asked for feedback from our athletes. And particularly, you've got to be intelligent about the athletes you're picking. And it probably helps to sample people who performed really, really well in that particular year, and probably people who struggled a little bit in that year, and listening and valuing what they have to say. So it allows you to make, whatever changes are necessary. And I think another thing that I've really tried doing, and again, we've talked a lot about Vern, but looking outside of my sport, not just relying on the traditional year-long season plan for swimming. You're going to do this much of aerobic capacity and this much of anaerobic power, so on and so forth. There's so much information out there today, and I'm fortunate to be connected with a lot of people that are outside the sport. What are sports that are similar based to us, like aerobic power-based sports? What are they doing to pull the best out of their athletes, and how do you apply that to the water, which is, for us, it's very different. Like we're land-based, made to walk upright, 2 feet, and our sport, we're horizontal in an entirely different medium. So there's always the question of how much volume is too much volume, and how much intensity is too much intensity compared to land-based sports, because I know track coaches think we're crazy. But I think learning from people outside of our sport is really important.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I have personally explored how far and how hard you can go. And, sometimes to my greatest fault. I think, some of those resources that you mentioned are things that we're all thinking about. One of the things, and this is a plug for Fitter and Faster, but Brett Hawk did an awesome talk with Carl Lewis. And Carl Lewis talked a lot about the mental aspect of how he prepared and how he took that mental training into his physical training. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to look outside the box of swimming and see how we can create better athletes, not focus simply on how we create better swimmers. Chris, can you elaborate a little bit on that and what you're doing at Carmel in that respect?
I just search for YouTube cat videos. That's all. No problem. No, I mean, I think I kind of look at different things, and honestly, I do just a lot of reading and talking with different people, and just stealing. Man, you just got to be a good thief, and I think you do have to be careful. I mean, Ian, I've made the mistake of going to a meet and trying to steal and learn, but I think sometimes it takes away from what I do well, and so I think you have to make sure you stick to who you are, be authentic, and stick to your values, and like we talked about at the beginning, and then from those things kind of stem out and figure out what can work and what can at your program. But I mean, I'm really enjoying reading and learning different deep dives in little. I can't even speak right now, but small spaces. But then if I really want to get confused, I'll talk to Vern, and then I'll be really messed up. And then at the end of the tunnel, I'll come up with something new. So, sometimes you just gotta, and you get stuff from weird places. I mean, I've watched NBA warm up and go, oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you watch, I mean, like I love going to games early and watching them warm up. It sounds so silly, but just getting ideas from places everywhere you go. So, yeah.
So full disclosure, we're at a meet 2012 at the University of Buffalo. You guys are on deck. Chris is posting up the warm-up to swim on the wall. And every day you forgot to pick it up. Guess who picked it up and put it in his coach's bag? I still have them too, man.
That's great. Yeah.
And I was telling my associate head coach, Brett Leader, today, I was telling him, I said, you know that stuff that we do like every day, like that's some Carmel stuff? And Brett's like, yeah, that's great stuff. And I said, yeah, Chris is like 5 years ahead of what we're doing right now. So I definitely appreciate that. When you guys are talking about your macro plan at the beginning of the season, how are you disseminating that information to your staff? And when you're meeting with your staff, are you doing it weekly in staff meetings, monthly? How do you meet with your staff, and how do you disseminate that message of the macro training plan?
I guess I'll go. Well, I mean, the thing that we do that I've always done, and I really will give Chris Webb a shout out and a lot of credit, former Carmel Swim Club coach, and really doing a lot of work with Dane right now. But, Ian, is that you, buddy?
Dog's going nuts. Sorry.
Dog's going nuts. So, yeah. You know, we do a whole Excel spreadsheet. You know, I look at last year's Excel spreadsheet. I make one for this year. I map out everything. I think Bob Bowman does that too. I've seen his plans, and just mapping it out by week, when our competitions are, when we want to peak in different places. And then from there, taking that macro cycle and then making it into, and I got this from Vern, is mapping out a 3-week microcycle and having those plans. And so the first week is very detailed. The second week, a little less detailed. And the third week is a little less detailed. But sharing that, and we have a weekly staff meeting about what the 3-week plan is, what the overall plan is, what's working, what's not working, who's having issues on the group. So, you think big, and then you break it down to what's going to happen that day. And then, I like the 3 weeks because it just helps me get to think, okay, what's coming up? What's a meet? Are these kids going to be tired? And if you do this enough times, you get really good at predicting. And I think that's the other thing I'm trying to learn now is predicting and then seeing what's going to happen and seeing how I can improve my machine with the program in terms of what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Sure. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate to spend that time at Carmel with Plumb and Webb, and I know it's really important for all of us growing as coaches, and one of those things that stayed with us. I like Chris, I have a large spreadsheet that is my year plan, and essentially my guardrails, and I need that because if I don't have it, it's easy for me to get off course pretty quickly. And like Chris, then I have a smaller microcycle plan as well. We don't go 3 weeks; we actually go 2. And I actually share all of that with my entire staff. So if I'm having a really good week and I'm getting ahead on my work, I can usually get the next week's plan done by Friday. But often or not, it's some point on Sunday morning when I get up and have my coffee and write things down. But I share the whole thing with the entire staff, whether you're a attendant or coach or you're coaching senior 1, which is my counterpart group of one of our different sites. I want them to see this is what the top group is doing. This is what they're pointing towards. Not because you should copy it, but because you should be aware of what's going on at the finishing point of the program. We have weekly staff meetings, and we do a lot of breaking out and working on individual groups and individual plans throughout the season. We kind of have checkpoints, if you will. And the way that we're structured is so that if our 2 main sites at Chamblee or Alpharetta, if you're coaching AG2 Gold, which is our top 11, 12-year-olds, you're also coaching Senior 3 Gold, which is sectional level senior athletes. And those 2 coaches share the same responsibility at both sites, so they can get together and have a real planning talk and make sure they're on the same page. So we do a lot of individual work as well with, within our staff of making sure that the plan, one, there is a plan, and then how that plan connects, site to site, and then also up and down the program, making sure people can make smooth transitions from one senior group to the next or the next age group up.
Sure. I think, guys, one of the biggest mistakes when I was a very young coach was that I was talking with my staff every day on deck, but I wasn't necessarily meeting with my staff on a regular basis. And in New York State with high school swimming, and I know Chris, primarily this is an aspect of your program too. We have so many different coaches in so many different places during the entire season. So it can be hard. One of the things that maybe we're learning through quarantine, and Ian, you mentioned this earlier, is here we go, boom, 9:30, we're all home. Carve out that half hour, with your family where you can jump on a Zoom conference and meet with the staff, because there are so many teams in our LSC that I feel like are missing that piece. So I'm glad that we were able to speak on that very quickly. A question that I was most excited to ask both of you: what role do the athletes play in the development of your team goals, and how is that woven into the fabric of your overall plan? Is there athlete feedback after the coaches explain what the season is going to look like, or is it something that you try to consider before you put it in writing? And Ian, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit. I believe a lot in athlete feedback. But ultimately, look, you got to get all the oars rowing in the right direction. So, there's no point in creating goals and cramming them down someone's throat saying, hey, this is where we're going. It's much better when they are, part of that decision-making process. And that's honestly something that, I value learning from Chris, is that, one thing that I love stealing that I stole from, a former Carmel coach is actually back at Carmel now in a different role, is Maggie Mestrich. We come up with a lot of group non-negotiables. So there's obviously there are standards and there are rules that exist, within the Dynamo culture from the coaching staff, but more importantly, each group of athletes in their particular training group each year create a level of non-negotiable that they believe in. It's their words. Okay, this is what we expect out of ourselves. This is what we expect out of our teammates. This is what we expect out of our coaches. And more often, those are way more powerful than any type of rule or standard that I'm going to hold them to. So we take it so far as they actually have laminated sheets with their pace charts and everything. And there's got to be one on the wall every single day during practice. In your lane, there's got to be your pace charts as well as the laminated non-negotiables so that they see it on a regular basis. So I really bring the athletes in as much as we can. And I try to take their temperature quite a bit on just how they're doing. One of the things that I stole from New Zealand Rugby that was also a gift from Vern is that we do these individual performance plans about every 6 weeks, which is basically an Excel spreadsheet that covers all aspects of their life. So where they are academically, where they are with their nutrition, their rest, obviously their training, their strength and conditioning, and they just color code it. Green is, this is a good area for me. Yellow, okay, it's going okay, but I need some work there. And red is, I think this is a weakness that needs to be addressed. And it's all confidential, only comes back to the coaching staff, and they can write as many notes as they want in there. And especially in that mode, they are willing to share so much information because there's no pressure to do it. They're not face to face with someone. And all we do is just try to track it and make sure that we're trending more green or more yellow. And if you start seeing more yellow or more red, then individual conversations need to happen as well. So I think that's, when you put that on them, it shows how much you trust them for feedback. So that when it's okay, this is our goal for the year, or what do you want our goals to be for the year, they're willing participants in that process. And then you, like I said, you have all the oars rowing in the right direction.
I really like the idea of compartmentalizing each part of what the athlete needs to do to progress. And that works harmonically with the coaching staff. And I think you've outlined that really well there. The other thing I like is it's visceral, right? They see the areas that they need to work on with that spreadsheet. We mentioned spreadsheets, and my assistant coach, Scott Wisner, just texted me, and he said, have you ever seen Josh White's seasonal plan at Michigan? And if you've ever gotten a chance to take a look at that, it is so intricate in that Excel sheet. But I think what those things do is, like you said, Ian, it creates a guardrail for us, and it keeps us on track. And that's really, really important. And one thing that I think a lot of club coaches don't do very often is spend that extra time devoting yourself to doing these things in order to create that program that's going to unlock success for your athletes. It does take a lot of time. One of the big things that we're talking about all the time in our profession, and I know you both will agree, is time for us to have with our family and friends and time for us to relax. We can do that, but I think it's important to realize how hard you have to work as a club coach when you're listening to the goals of your athletes. Chris, how do athletes play a role in the development of your macro training plan?
Well, I don't know if they have a whole lot of input into the training plan. I don't really think they need to have input into that. They have a lot of input into the culture and who they are and who they're trying to develop. And that's, I try to have that all be from them and having them come up. I mean, I try to create prompts for them to do. And I thought what we did this year with the girls was pretty unique. But one of my assistants, Rhiannon Sheets, and I, we came up with an idea, and we said we were a little bit frustrated. So we came down with a list of 6 things, 6 words that we wanted, that we felt were important for a great team to have. We defined them for the athletes so they knew. And then we had them force rank where they thought the team was. And then we had the coaches force rank. And it stood out to me because the girls had their number 1 is intensity, and that was ours was a 6. We had this great differences between what they thought they were doing and then what we thought they were doing. And honestly, that led to some great conversation. And we said, like, well, this is why we have it as 6. Why do you guys have it as a 1? And I think a lot of great conversation stemmed from having these discussions as to what, having, because like, I think all of us as coaches go, oh my God, they're driving me crazy. But you got to have those conversations and explain why. And these kids today, they want to know why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? So it wasn't easy for me to explain and put down into words, but I think getting them involved in the process and explaining our as coaches reasoning for thinking that way and hearing their side of the story too helped me kind of decipher. And I really think that really helped our girls team.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think, more and more we are required to have that open communication with our athletes. I hate listening to conversations about generational differences. I think it's more about relating to who you're coaching now. So having that line of open communication is so important for the total success of your program. This question is actually pointed to both of you because during your time at Carmel together, you had an incredibly successful run. And I do want to touch on it because, and I had this conversation with Chuck and Sue Chen last week. I think a lot of young coaches and a lot of coaches who are just starting with their programs, they think to themselves, well, we will never be as good as so-and-so. Chris, when you took over Carmel, you didn't have a single junior national qualifier in 2000 or 2003 whenever you started. In 2012, you and Ian brought 17 athletes to Olympic trials. Can you talk about some of the things that led to that level of success? Because that's pretty unprecedented when we talk about turnarounds in terms of 2 quads or 3 quads. So can you talk a little bit about how the approach that led to that type of success? And Ian, I'll let you start because you were directly working with the program, and a lot of times what we find, and Chris, I know that you'll back me up on this, but a lot of times our assistant coaches are the first ones to know what the temperature of the team is. Sometimes they are the first person that those athletes go to. So, Ian, I'll let you set it up, and then Chris can talk at the 10,000-foot level.
Yeah, I mean, Chris became head coach in 2006, and I was brought on as head age group coach in 2006. We had, some pretty talented athletes, but the part that was missing was the culture. In my opinion, Carmel was much like many other clubs in Indiana, and I hope there's not a lot of Indiana coaches logging on to this listening, but very high school oriented. It was like the first year, like we got through the high school championships and like our senior LSC championships, and people just like disappeared. This summer was like a ghost town. Like the numbers were really down, and this like year round and big picture focus wasn't there. So, I think Chris, led the way with creating a culture of like we're going to think bigger than anybody else thinks. And I think that became our primary goal. Is like, look, enough of this Indiana swimming stuff. We're leaving this behind. Our goals are way bigger than winning any high school state championship or any senior or age group championship at the LSC level. We want to impact the sport at the highest levels. And first and foremost, like you got 3 full-time coaches that were fully committed to it, in sync. And granted, like there were plenty of arguments about how that needed to be executed, but like we back each other up 100%. And then when we were relentless with the kids with our message, it was just a matter of time before they started buying in too. So I think really to me, it was just more the culture piece, because I think as any coaches, like we evolved with our training. We found things that worked. We found things that didn't work. But we were just really focused on the cultural change. And when the cultural change happened, like you ended up with an army of people who are ready to run through a wall for not really you, but for the person next to them. And, that's what I remember Carmel always being, is that the team aspect and the team culture is by far the strongest thing that exists there. And everything else is a direct result of that.
Ian, I think to your credit too, we have seen that start to happen at Dynamo. So that is a major credit to you for taking what you learned there at Carmel in those aspects and applying it to Dynamo. And as you know, and as you're living through, not the easiest job to take over from a legend, right? For most of us in the club coaching community, Jason was one of the best people that we knew. I mean, so giving, and the athletes and community there adored him. And so that was a big position to fill, and you're doing it extraordinarily well.
I appreciate that.
Chris, when you were starting to implement that new culture at Carmel, and you had young coaches like Ian, and you knew that there was so much potential for success, what types of things did you do to tap into that in order to create a situation where you would have 17 Olympic trial qualifiers inside of 12 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, the great thing about Ian, Chris, and I was it was always a collaborative effort. I may have been head coach, but we made each other better, and I just felt like we're always working together for the greater good. And that, I never felt like anybody's ideas were discounted any less or more based on their title or their position. It was more of a meritocracy, let's hope, back then, that our ideas were more important than our position. So I learned just as much as from those guys as I hope they did from me, and we made each other better. And so I think on the coaching side, you had that. For me personally, though, was just deciding, like, why can't we be good? Like, instead of asking you, like, we should be one of the best clubs in the country. Why not? Instead of asking why, you start asking why not? Why can't we do that? People go, I don't know if you could swim fast in season. Well, why not? Like, who's telling you can't? You have to get rid of these sacred cows that people hold over you and your program and your thinking. So I think in many ways I had to give ourselves permission to be good. And like, you've got to say, it's okay to be good here, guys. We can be great. We can be on that level. We were so young and hungry at that time. And, what we did to get there, we're going to go swim the best. We're going to go learn from the best. We went to go see Terry McKeever at Cal in, I don't know, maybe 2009. And like, we were just going to be adamant about getting on that pool deck. It didn't matter who we had to talk to, what we had to do. I mean, he was like, who are these buffoons walking on my pool deck?
It's exactly what it was like too.
Yeah. So, and I remember, going to this golf tournament. I got invited by Speedo to the Bob Bowman or Michael Phelps golf tournament in Baltimore. I booked my ticket for a day later. And I said, I'm going to go see North Baltimore. And, I emailed Bob. He didn't respond. And so I'm going to Baltimore. I had this flight. I don't even know if I'm going to get on. And by the 15th hole, one of the assistant coaches pulls me and said, "Hey, Chris, you can come on our deck tomorrow." I was like, "Oh, thank God, I have something to do." But I think you just have to go be ambitious and challenge whatever glass ceiling you're putting over your head. You have to get rid of, because I hear it drives me nuts when people say, we can't be that good, we can't do this, we can't do that. Why are you telling yourself that? Those are, I think, we all have our limitations, but Ian and I know Ian will agree with this. Like, it's about resourcefulness, not resources. So think about what you do have and what you don't have. Think about all the great things that you can do, and go see those things and challenge what you think is possible, because that's where it first starts.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that story, Chris, because I was 21 years old. I was a graduate assistant, and I emailed John Cadigan at the time at North Baltimore, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Mike, come on down deck." And ASCA happened to be in Washington, D.C. that year, so I walked into Meadowbrook, and John Urbanchek happened to be there that day. Bob was there. Paul Yetter was there. Who am I? And I got to walk around with those guys. And for you, that was a cool story about Cal. And then, a few years later, you have Amy Bilquist swimming there. So that had to kind of come full circle for you.
Yeah, I think she was probably grateful that she let us on her pool deck that day to get Amy Bilquist.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, we've gotten through all of our bullet points. I'm going to open it up to some chat questions. And this is a great one from Andrew Bartolini. A question for the panelists. When you start your reopen plan and you get back, Ian, what is your first week going to look like? And I'm asking you first because I know I actually got to talk to Chris Davis the other day. So I know that in Georgia, you guys are back this week. Is that right? This coming week?
Yeah, the 14th is when pools are permitted to open in Georgia. So we're targeting the 14th for opening.
So what's your first week going to look like?
We probably have a little bit more of a conservative approach to some of the other teams that I know that are getting access right now.
And Ian, just before you go on, I just want everybody to know that one of your locations is literally across the street from the CDC. Is that right?
It is, but not like the CDC that studies. It's more of an admin building. There's not a lot of lab work that goes there, but it is literally across the street. Yeah, we're focusing on senior athletes first, just because we like athlete safety, and following all the safety precautions that we're putting in place is paramount, and we feel we can execute that well with our senior groups. And we want to make sure that we do that before we start introducing our age group or rec swim or other people in there. Obviously, our goal is to get as many people in the water as quickly as we can, as safely as we can. But in my opinion, I think you can always add people and grow on what you're doing, as opposed to kicking the doors open and throwing 400 athletes in and be like, oh no, we shouldn't have done that. So we're focusing on senior athletes. We're only going 3 times per week. We're in school through basically May 21st or so. That's when school finishes, and then we'll adjust the calendar accordingly. But first week's only an hour, and it's really going to be focused on getting in the water and getting back feel. And from a season planning standpoint, there's nothing going on this summer, in my opinion, that's going to be worthwhile anyway. So we're shifting our focus to December and beyond. So we're just going to treat this as one long season. And we'll ramp up the swimming accordingly as we're able to add water time and frequency of practices. But right now, senior only, 3 times a week for an hour. And the second week, we're going to bump it up to 90 minutes, and then we'll reevaluate.
Awesome. And Chris, I don't know, again, what's happening in Indiana. Here in New York, with schools being closed, we really don't have a lot of access to facilities. So our reopen plan is mostly centered around open water training and Zoom dryland. What's the first week going to look like for Carmel once you do get back in the pool?
Oh, besides planting corn, I mean, it's probably look just like Ian's. You know, it's not going to be anything extraordinary. We haven't been in the water so much, and like, I think it's just going to be setting the standard and the boundaries for behavior in terms of being safe. I mean, from what I'm hearing from coaches who are opening in Florida, the hardest part is having these kids stopping from hugging each other when they see each other because they haven't seen each other so long. So I think initially it's just going to be about standards of behavior.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's something that's incredibly important here moving forward is how do we set that precedent in those early days and continue to follow safe precautions and whatever federal, state, and local social distancing guidelines are in place. Another great question here is how do you frame your dryland? Let's say we're not in quarantine. What does your dryland schedule look like Monday through Saturday? Ian, I'll start with you.
You're probably going to get a really similar answer between the two of us here. So we have 3 dedicated what we would consider dryland training sessions or weight room training sessions, or I consider everything on dryland, whether it's doing a lift or doing core work or whatever. It's all dryland training. So we have 3 dedicated sessions a week. We typically go Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It'll vary whether it's a morning or afternoon time based on the academic year, we're in the summer or things like that. And then the other days, like there's still a land component, but it's more in the form of a warm up to swim standpoint and probably a little bit more core dominant in that warm up piece. And the warm up to swim piece is usually geared towards whatever type of work you're doing that day. So obviously, if you're doing some breaststroke, you're going to be focused on your hips and your thoracic spine mobility a little bit more. And if it's backstroke, maybe a little more cross, shoulder to hip connection.
Okay, awesome, Chris. I think we'll hear some similarities.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah, I mean, we try to go 3 times a week, and we do the warm-up swim on the other days. We do it beforehand. I think people ask me, why do you go before or after, and aren't they so tired if you go first? And I always say the kids will adapt to whatever you give them. Over time, going dryland first, those kids are primed and ready to go, and you hardly need any warm up after you've been in the weight room. So some of our fastest workouts have been after we come out of the weight room. So all the other stuff, we have the same pretty much program probably in dryland.
I'll add one thing, and I think Chris would probably agree with this because we sampled with it at Carmel quite a bit, and I'm sure they may do it in some areas, is that sometimes during the season, your land focus might be a little bit higher, and maybe even some areas more important than the water. So you may do some standalone dryland sessions. So there are points during the year where we come in the morning and all we do is dryland in the morning. And that may be because I'm expecting a certain level of effort or focus or intensity that you will get from them because that's the only thing they have to do in that particular session. But I do think you have to make them adapt to, this is the challenge today. You've got to have a great dryland session and you've got to go really fast.
Absolutely. I love it. I did read a study about a year or two ago about swimming and sprinting after heavy lifting. And there's a correlation between some of the enzymes. Vern could probably tell you this much better than I can. But some of the enzymes that are released in your muscles that will actually create the opportunity for really fast swims after heavy lifts, believe it or not. So if that's a misconception that's going out there, you can look more into that. One of the questions that was asked last week with Chuck and Sue that I thought was great comes from my friend Ryan Callan at Fairport Area Swim Team in Rochester. You're stuck on a desert island and you have a junior national qualifying capable team. What are the 3 main sets that are going to be your staple for that group? I'll start with you, Ian.
Oh my God. I don't know if I can even answer that. I just don't.
Why are you stuck out on an island with a group of
Yeah. That's the most Plumb answer ever, right there. Like, wait a second. Why are we in this situation? I mean, you may not like this answer, but like, I just don't get tied to sets. Like, I don't think, one set is going to define you or undefine like what you do. And I'll be honest. Like, I got this talk from my good friend in Australia, and it was of Bill Sweetenham, and it was just 20 minutes, and it was done like last week or whatever. And he was talking a little bit about how like the 400-meter freestyle should be like the event they train for, and all other events should be a branch out of the 400-meter freestyle. And I had like this debate with Russell Mark about it, and I'm just like, I just don't know. Like, you can define yourself on one event and one training mode. I just like to think as a team, I want to impact national level from the 50 to the mile, and the 100 to the 200 of every stroke, and the 400 IM and the 200 IM. So like from the set standpoint, like I don't know that I really would consider it sets. I just more like the characteristics of your team and their level of execution would probably matter more than me in the actual set itself.
Sure, absolutely. Chris, how about you? What do we got? I know that I used to joke with TJ all the time, say, TJ, man, like, how can a kid go a 500 under 420 and then go 19 mid in the 50? He's like, hey, Mike, all we do are 20-yard sprints, baby.
Yeah. Aerobic loops with TJ. Aerobic loops.
That's right.
Well, I mean, I guess if the question is what are my 3 favorite sets, I'll just answer that question because Ian went a different route. So, I think, from an anaerobic standpoint, it might be like 20 50s on 130, hold a pace time. I think there's accountability with that the athletes really buy into. And I make the athletes choose their time. I would choose any of Urbanchek's threshold sets, but some of my favorite Urbanchek threshold sets that my kids hate, which I know that's why it works. But 21 50s long course, hold your red pace or whatever, something along those lines. And then, I have to give it up for my IM work. We have the IM sets that Ian and I created back in the day, a little active rest IM.
That was such a good set.
A lot of 70. Is that a set of 75s?
We do it. The basic premise of the set, I think it's something like you go 650s or 850s. Odds are fast stroke, evens are easy free, so we're going to do three rounds of this. 850s, odds are fast stroke, evens are easy free. Then you're going to go like a 200 IM fast and then a 300 descend by round.
Ooh.
Yeah. And, I think we've done this set where the 50s fly are on 30, easier on a minute. The backstrokes are on 30, breasts are on 35. The 200 IM might be on 230, and you put that 300 on 4 minutes or something like that. We love that set. It's a great set. It encompasses a lot of things, and the kids hate it. And we used to do it every Friday morning. So
it was a love-hate relationship, though. Like, they hated it, but they crushed it.
Yeah, I mean, we started that set. You start small. We might go 6, and then 100, and a 200. You could, but yeah, I think those. If I had to choose 3 sets, those might be the ones.
All right,
that's a good answer.
I'm going to ask probably the toughest question yet. So, for you, Ian, at Dynamo, most impressive training performance this year. Don't have to say the athlete's name, but you can talk about what they did. So this season, most impressive training performance.
That's a really good question. A young girl who, like the beginning of the year, like struggled with intensity, and like she's a butterfly, or 100 fly is probably her best event. And like if I asked her to go fast on 100 fly at practice, like she might go like 104 or something. She's like, that was really good, and I'm like, yeah, no. that's not very good. Like, what do you want to go? And she's like, well, I think I could go like at least 54 on the 100 fly. I'm like, then like you've got to be able to go like 58 or 57 on command. And by the end of the year, she was able to push 57 in practice a couple times. So I thought that was a really good progression. And then, I've had a little girl backstroker who, like, I think she pushed 156 in the 200-yard backstroke in practice one day. That was pretty good.
Yep, that's pretty solid, my man. That's a pretty solid in practice push performance. Chris, how about you this year?
What are Wyatt and Jake laying down? I want to hear it, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was hoping. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, Wyatt and Jake can throw down some stuff. That's for sure. I watched Wyatt in a suit on 6-100s. I think he did something like he went fly, he went 49, back he went 48. I think he might have done 2 back at 48, and then he did 3 freestyle going 45, all in practice. Yeah, and I think you just have to redefine what's fast. I mean, training fast is an attitude, so you're just trying to set up situations where you're doing fast stuff in practice, and it just becomes part of the norm.
Guys, this has been absolutely terrific. I really appreciate your time. Hey, listen, anytime you guys send athletes, well, now you, Chris, but Ian, when you were there, anytime you guys send athletes to Victor, make sure they're all like Jeffrey Williamson, because that was awesome.
Great kid, yeah.
So anytime there's any athletes, Chris from Carmel, who are moving to Victor, just make sure they're of that league. But I really appreciate your time. You guys have been wonderful. Ian, how can people get in touch with you if they have questions?
Best way to reach me is my email address. It's Ian, IAN, at dynamoswimclub.com.
Fantastic. Chris, how about you?
C Plumb, Plumb, at carmelswimclub.org.
So, guys, Ian Murray and Chris Plumb, 2 of the best in our business right now. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with Fitter and Faster tonight. We look forward to next week. We're going to have Dan Flack on the program. Looking forward to having him and talking shop with him. Guys, thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Take care.